Welcome to the MENA Surge podcast, the ultimate source for all things Web3 and Fintech related in the MENA region. Powered by Fintech Surge and Future Blockchain Summit, taking place at Dubai Harbour, October 15th through 18th, alongside Expand North Star and in association with GITEX Global. I'm happy to be joined by our partners today from Cointelegraph MENA.
Cointelegraph is the leading Web3 publication covering all the latest trends in blockchain, Web3, and Fintech for the region.
Welcome, Tim Kring. I am honored to have you in a discussion with GITEX and Expand North Star. You'll be coming to speak at our event in October.
Yeah, thank you. Really looking forward to it.
So can we begin by having an overview on who you are and what the audience should know about you?
Okay, well, I'm a longtime Hollywood storyteller, primarily known for television, for creating drama series. But my passion is really about the audience and how to engage audiences in new and interesting ways. And so for many years, there was just a very traditional model of that. There was really only the Hollywood version of television, where you pushed content out into the world, and your relationship with that audience was very limited. Your only understanding of even how the audience interacted with you was just a Nielsen rating up and down kind of thing. But once the internet became, a place where audiences could find a show and then gather around that show and gather online, then suddenly it became my fascination with how to reach audience became much more about the dynamics of how to have a relationship with the audience that could be more dynamic and more involving. And that has led me to all kinds of other kinds of storytelling that engages audiences across multiple platforms and tries to reach audiences where they are. So those are the things that I think people should know about me.
I mean, that's a great message to startups and founders, that you view the potential clients as audience.
Yeah, I think that it's a big mistake that a lot of startups have, where you're creating a product, you're creating something that's going to have users and customers, that a storytelling approach changes that word from user to audience. And just the word audience has within it an implication. It has a set of parameters. It has it implies a relationship. You have a relationship with an audience. The audience it's almost a dance. It's like a tango. The audience you have to coax and appeal and entertain and hold things back and push things out. There's a dynamic relationship to an audience. A user can be sort of a cold thing. I'm going to put something out into the world and the user is going to use it, right? I just think that it can be psychologically, by just approaching that user as an audience, it just builds with it a more holistic approach, a more sensitive approach, a more dynamic approach. And I just would urge people who are creating products in the world to spend a little time on a thought experiment of thinking about the end user as an audience member, and that you are a storyteller trying to tell your story to that audience, and see how it changes the way you think about your product. I think that's a very that can be a very, I think it's when you look at somebody like Steve Jobs, clearly that guy was the storyteller. He understood the whole idea of drama and mystique and mystery and holding back and then revealing, and he understood the user as a dynamic it was a dynamic relationship. He wanted people to feel something and experience something, And so I think a lot of the times, the engineering approach sort of fails to recognize that part of it. It's almost sort of like left brain, right brain a little bit. Like you can go through the world left brain or right brain and function just fine. But when you figure out how to combine them, you can do, these are where big
Heroes is what you're
game-changing things
for, and
come
I wanted
from.
to have a conversation with you about the superhero industry. Heroes came out in 2006 and roughly coincides with the MCU that started in 2008, I believe, the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
And the industry for superheroes has certainly changed since then. And I wanted to hear what you think has changed. Heroes is very unique and groundbreaking to this day in presenting heroes as ordinary people that discover superpowers and in an ordinary, relatable world. And that's very different from what you have today. I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. I mean, well, listen, the truth is there was really no other version of doing heroes at the time, because the networks at that time thought that anything genre was kind of relegated to, remember, broadcast networks were just that. They were about broadcasting, about reaching the biggest audience. So television shows, that were successful back in that era, really tried to be all things to all people, right? You didn't have these little nichified audiences where, a fractured audience that if you like to watch this kind of show, you go to this particular platform and watch their shows. These networks needed to reach as broad of an audience as possible. And so there was a belief within the network culture at the time that genre, superhero, comic book, anything having to do with that was just simply too small of an audience, and to try and do. So in a way, heroes had to have this almost Trojan horse approach to having a superhero, genre underneath it. It had to sneak up on the audience in other ways. It had to be, in some ways, Heroes was designed to be all kinds of shows combined into one. And the truth is, I was not a genre guy. And maybe that's what made it possible for me to actually pull this off. I didn't grow up as a comic book guy and a big genre guy. I didn't really know the rules. I didn't really know that much about the genre. And so I was approaching it at the time. I wanted to do a show about, I wanted to do an aspirational show about the world that we were living in. It was post 9/11, and after that, there was the world was a very scary place for a few years after 9/11, and we had shows that became sort of jingoistic, shows like 24, and shows like that were very much about the killing the other, going after people that are. And I started thinking about, well, how could we do a show that was sort of aspirational? I was raising kids, small children at the time. They're now older, but they were small at the time. And I was thinking about the world that they were going to inhabit, and what kind of, where were the heroes for them going to come from when a lot of the institutions had broken down. And so I started to think, well, wouldn't it be aspirational and inspirational if the heroes that could save the world were, the kid next door, or the weird guy down the street, or the kid that sits in the back of the classroom that nobody pays attention to. I started to think that rather than even ordinary people, I was like, what if they're like hyper ordinary, like the kind of person you would not even look twice at when you walk down the street, and that they would have the powers to do this. I thought would be very relatable for people, and so I wanted to treat the idea of a superpower not as I wanted to, it'd been relegated to this fantasy idea where everybody understood what superpowers were, and you put on a spandex costume and you were, but I wanted to do like, what would happen if you woke up and you thought you could fly? You got out of bed and your foot hovered over the ground for 6 inches or something like that, and then it dropped back down. What would you do in real life? What would you really do about that? You'd panic at first. You'd think maybe something was wrong. Maybe you had some kind of like balance problem, a physical problem, or thought you were going crazy, and then maybe you go talk to a shrink about it, or talk to a priest about it, whatever it is. How would you really react to these things? And in truth, I wanted to treat them almost as though treat these superpowers and the awareness of the growing awareness that you were changing. I wanted to treat it almost like as a curse or an affliction. And if you are a person who's you've got a job that you don't like, and you're trying to date this woman and it's not going well, and you've got a mother who's dying and you're trying to take care of her, and then you discover that you've got this superpower, right? Well, okay, I'm still trying to date this girl. I still have this job that I don't like, and I'm still got a dying mother. And how does it help my life that suddenly I find out I've got this superpower? And I thought that was an interesting way to create drama, is to treat it as though it's this affliction that you have to learn about. And then once you learn about it, then you have to perfect it. And once you perfect it, you realize you can do something with it. And then you realize, oh, I've got a destiny to do something important with this. So that was the arc I was trying to. And so that lent itself, back to your original question, it sort of lent itself to going through the portal of a very of treating this as a kind of an relatable, ordinary, storytelling.
I'm not a big superhero guy, right? But I loved the first Iron Man movies, and then you're saying like you're so tempted to do it just because you can, but the focus has shifted towards doing just a lot of CGI, and no one is really captivated by it. Like I watched.
Well, I think
it's like a movie. It's like a video game I'm watching.
Yeah, and I think one is the that obviously the studio executives and the ones who are reaping the benefits of these movies, they see the success of a movie and they think that that's the thing that they have to duplicate. Right? It worked once, so it can work again, and this time we'll give. It had $100 million budget last time and made $1 billion. Let's give it $150 million next time. And, there's this sort of natural kind of intention on their part to just keep duplicating these successes. And I don't know whether the audience is they're just being fed what's given to them, or do they really want these?
It's pretty clear they don't want it. I mean, going back to the fatigue of superheroes, there's been one flop after the other. They clearly don't want it. And I think there's a correlation between great storytelling and box office success. And like when you look at some of the flops, I think like Captain Marvel, where there's more about to put it bluntly, the virtue signaling and the wokeness of the storyline is more important than the actual character and the excitement and the drama.
Yeah. And it's sort of, it's such a big tent thing now, these superhero shows. Everybody kind of wants their piece of it, right? So it's like, how many different ways can we make how many different versions of a superhero show now that you are a superhero movie, now that we've had these successes, well, how many can we have, and what if we came at it from this angle, what if we came at it from that angle? And you're right, I think it does feel like it's like eating a big meal every single night. After a week or two, you're like, I'm not,
it's almost,
let's not go out for the big meal tonight.
It's almost like the distinctive characteristics of one movie from another is even lacking. I mean, I'm not a big fan, right? So for me, it's like it's all just the same movie at this point.
It's interesting with a show like Heroes, were it to come back, a version of it to come back. The challenge really is, well, its success was its uniqueness at the time and its sort of global approach to casting and, you know, languages, and the whole idea that people from all over the world were finding one another, and it was about interconnectivity and global consciousness, and if we could come together, we could save the world. There was a lot of aspirational ideas in it. And it's hard to know right now whether that would be enough for people, you know, or is it what you're saying? Could it be actually refreshing to go back to something that restrains the idea of, you know, in Heroes, the truth is we really, you know, there was a lot of sleight of hand in Heroes. You thought you saw a lot more superpowers than you did, you know. And if you really added up those moments in an episode, there weren't very many. And they were alluded to, or the camera would find, you know, something after the effect would have been done on a movie. You know, we did a lot of sleight of hand, and I'm wondering whether that tease would be now almost kind of desired or nostalgic in some way.
I mean, in my heart, I feel that that's what people are dying for. I saw this review on comparing the last Mission Impossible with the first Mission Impossible, and they pointed out that in the first Mission Impossible, a single gunshot fired in that first movie. It's like Mission Impossible was a drama, and now it's just one long action sequence. There is no
right. It's a sequence of action sequences strung together. Yeah.
And moving the conversation towards technology, right? Like people seek a connection, an emotional connection to the characters, and they're not getting that anymore. And CGI is a huge obstacle for achieving that. But on top of that, the scripts are so formulaic, and now the big debate is the AI and ChatGPT in writing scripts. To me, it's like anyone with any talent, with any originality would have such an easy time to stand out.
The other thing is that when the audience has now, they understand what visual effects are. They get them. They know what's not real and what isn't real. I mean, what is real and what isn't real. And so that artifice of this isn't real, I think it just creates a distance from caring about the moment. You know that it's not really happening, right? So I think going back to things that, I mean, and even if you did enhance them with visual effects, if they were enhanced in a way that it was, that artifice wasn't there, you tried to make things feel as though they were real, and rather than superpower, it almost felt like magic realism or something. You know, I think that audiences might find that a little bit more alluring, you know, and kind of refreshing in a way. But you know, again, it all goes back to this, you know, the Mission Impossible example that you gave. There's a kind of mission creep towards, you know, like, you know, it just happens naturally. The next one was like, oh, we had one gunshot in the next one, we can do 10 this time. And then when you do 10, okay, let's do 100. And you know, it just keeps, you know.
I want to hear what you think about like the overkill aspect of that, because I remember hearing some commentary about when they created Superman, that he was just too all powerful, and any superhero needs its kryptonite and its weaknesses.
Yeah.
And now we're at the stage where like, oh, you can lift a train, throw it around. Everyone is all powerful. There isn't that relatability anymore with superheroes. Like,
and what we found, you know, in doing 4 seasons of a show, you know, where you're doing if you gave somebody too much power, you had to then find these ways to strip them of the power and bring them back to square one. You know, it was like this constant. So I know exactly what you're saying. That is the challenge. Things just lose drama the more the more powerful that a character gets. You have to find a way to undercut it and diminish it and all that. You know, it's a very complicated thing, and it has been very interesting to see how that mistaken premise that I talked about, that the studios and networks had, that genre was relegated. They didn't realize that there was this mainstream audience hungering for this stuff. But not only that, it coincided with the idea of fandom online and fandom being able to find one another. It used to be, if you were a comic book geek, you knew a few other comic book geeks, and it was a small little club that you had, right? Well, suddenly with the proliferation of online chats and fan boards and then social media and all of that, these people could all find one another and gather and grow an audience. And so once you realized how, and those people tended to be more fan oriented, more tech savvy, so they could find stuff online and search for things and search for each other and all that. And so that kind of active, passionate, crazy fan base kind of thing, that happened around the genre.
To have a fan base, you really need that relatability. And I wanted to go back to like the push on a lot of female superheroes now. I think one of the best examples of a superhero is Sarah Connor in Terminator. That is very relatable. She is someone that works alongside men, and she's still feminine. And I would like to add the bride in Kill Bill, right? It's also, she's playing on a lot of on her femininity and working alongside men, and her main enemies are both female. With heroes, you had female characters that had a lot of flaws, just like Sarah Connor and the bride. But a lot of the female characters today are flawless, and they're all powerful and absolutely non-relatable. Like the She-Hulk was a massive flaw. There is no character arc where you allow for this relatability.
I created heroes pretty far into my career. I'd been a long time writer of television and TV movies and some features and stuff. And it was, the television that I wrote was all about character. That was what you really cared about week in and week out. With a movie, it's a 2-hour thing and you want a spectacle and there's all of that. But with television, these people live in your home with you for an hour every week, and sometimes for years at a time. And so it's the lifeblood of television drama, is coming at it from the point of view of character. So that combination of someone like me taking on a genre thing before it had taken off, I was very, I just sort of naively approached it like I would any other, it was all about the characters. And I didn't know any other thing because I didn't have, I just wasn't enamored with the superpower stuff at all. It never really turned me on very much. I was only interested in those powers as how they afflicted my characters and forced them to make strange decisions and compromises and all that kind of stuff. So I just have a very different, I just came at it from a totally different angle then.
Times were certainly different when Heroes first came out. I mean, I guess you had TiVo, but you didn't have much internet streaming.
Yes.
People had to wait for the episodes to come out.
Yes.
And you've been an innovator of formats. How do you see your job as a screenwriter today in capturing an audience with an ever more shorter and fragmented attention?
Right. So Heroes was it was very innovative at the time of in how it approached the online audience. At the time, the ratings for television were starting to really go down for all of television, and it was this whole migration of people. Suddenly, social media had popped up. YouTube and then gaming, and there were just all sorts of competition for people's eyeballs at the time. And so the ratings for nightly television was starting to drop. So when Heroes got picked up to series at NBC, I think there were 6 people in what they called the .com division of the NBC at the time. And that's when we got picked up. And when we went on the air 4 months later, there were 67 people. So they hired 60 people over this 3 or 4 month period. Mandate that this .com division of the network had was get out there and figure out where the audience is and how to get them back to watching television. It was really a simple mandate. They knew they were out there. Sort of desperate energy from the network at the time. It was really kind of desperate. That energy met with a show, Heroes, that had kind of a lot of possibilities of how to reach that audience because of the genre stuff and because of the Comic-Con audience that we were going to try and reach, right? So we launched at Comic-Con before any television shows really launched. With me was this guy, Jeff Loeb, who is a big comic book guy, big giant comic book guy. And he really understood that audience. And so we designed a whole launch at Comic-Con that from that launch, we had this massive viral campaign that grew out of it. There was this hunger for having something on the air that that these fans could relate to. So like I said, with this mandate from the network to figure this thing out, we ostensibly had sort of a blank check to figure this idea out. Out of like the 300 people that work on a television show, we have 50 of them were dedicated to just the online stuff. And we did all kinds of experimental stuff because nobody, as I say, there was no such thing as a bad idea because nobody knew what a bad idea was. So we could try all kinds of stuff. And so we did, web series and mockumentaries and mashups and mobile games and all this ancillary content where the audience could find elements of the show. And because the show had a deep kind of mythology and a deep, canon to the show, and way too much story to tell anyway every week. It was a serialized show and it had a lot of story, a lot of characters. And so we started to approach this online thing as a kind of 360 universe that we could tell story in different areas. So on our online comic books, we would have one storyline. And so if a character on the show walked out of a room and you didn't see him again, you could follow that story on this comic book that would pop up the next day online, and you could see what happened when that character walked out of the room. And so it was trying to extend the story across all of these platforms and to sort of think of it as this 3-dimensional universe that you could live in. And so the audience just loved finding all this stuff, all these kind of like threads and Easter eggs and discoveries. And then the holy grail of that was when something that was generated online in an online comic or in a webisode or even some mobile content or something like that, when that would migrate back to the show. And so for the average audience, it would make sense on the show that character was there. But for the online audience who knew all about that character, it was really satisfying because they were like, oh my God, I love that character. I know everything about him. I know what. And so it was trying to generate a lot of insider knowledge because the truth is the social currency of fandom a lot of times is your knowledge, the depth of your knowledge about the thing that the show or the story world that you love. The depth of your knowledge is really your social currency, right? If you give a real fan a chance to find one more thing than the guy next to him, that's a big deal. And so we allowed for this interconnected world where people could find out a lot of stuff. And one of the things that we found, and this is really the most interesting part of the journey for me, we generated this content, a massive amount of content, and we'd push it out to the audience. And unlike television, where, like I said, you make the show 2 or 3 months before the audience sees it, then you get a Nielsen rating, whether the audience liked it. But you had no relationship with the audience. But with this content that we were pushing online, it was a much more dynamic, immediate relationship with the audience. You push it out in the morning, by the afternoon, the chat boards were all lit up, and people were, had found things and discovered things, and the scavenger hunt of it all. And so it became super dynamic, and almost rather than a one-way street where you push content out and the audience just consumes it, it sort of became this two-way street. People started creating, fan clubs around characters and started creating their own fan fiction. They started creating merchandise, and it was like an economy sort of popped up around this fan base, which I found really, really fascinating. It was very scary to the network and the old traditional model, because their version of like, wait, we don't control this thing, this is like this fan base out there that feels like they own this property. And I was like, hell yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, we were the most illegally downloaded show in the world, right?
Really?
And and on, these BitTorrent and Pirate Bay and all these kind of, for the network, they wanted to lawyer up and sue these, shut these things down. And I was like, what better fan in the world is somebody who will illegally go out to watch your show? My sense was, let's bring that guy in. Let's bring that fan into the fold and celebrate the fact that they're so hungry for it that they make, and at the time, remember, it was a kind of distribution model where somebody in some part of the world that maybe the show wasn't airing there until April or June, or maybe it wasn't ever going to air there, right? So for them, that was the only way to find the show.
I wasn't aware of this, but it's clear that you must have been very far ahead of your time to be using these different channels to reach an audience. And you keep using the word fandom. I mean, this is what the big studios are trying to recreate today, but when they try, it just feels so nakedly commercial when they put something out and go like, oh, this, even they sort of plant stuff that appears to be something from a fan, but it's obviously from a copywriter.
You're so right. And the truth is, it was all organic. It was all authentic. There's no genius behind it. We were just stumbling into the darkness, trying to, make content for this audience. And so a lot of this was just being invented before our very eyes. And you're right. When you go to a Comic-Con now and you see the way they try and launch these shows and they try and convince you that this is a hit show. Well, we never did. We had this very quiet, weird little viral thing, that we did when we launched and it became really kind of the gold standard of how to launch a show. But like a lot of things in life, it's very hard to recapture authenticity. And authenticity is, that is the one thing with the fan base that you can violate all kinds of things with your fans. You can, cut a character's hair that they liked or something and they'll get mad or whatever it is. You can kill off a character or have two people fall in love who shouldn't fall in love, whatever it is. You can survive all those little skirmishes. But when something is inauthentic, let me give you an example. Right down to like some of the merchandise that we would sell, there would be a story about that merchandise on the back of the box that would give you the backstory of Hiro Nakamura's sword that we sold. It had a little story about what the sword was that could only be found if you bought the sword and you read this thing inside the box, right? Everything that we pushed out had this kind of authenticity to it. The last writer strike we had, I was making Heroes, and we went on strike, and for about 3 or 4 months, content that went out to the audience continued was being generated by the marketing department of the network, trying to kind of emulate what we were doing, trying to kind of copy. And everything that we pushed out to the fans all generated from what we call the engine room, and the engine room of the show was the writer's room. So it had to come through the writers of the show, who have the show in their heads, had this kind of vocabulary. They knew what the show was, and so everything that came out of it was kind of organically to the narrative. But when you have some intern on the 15th floor of a building whose job it is to push this content out, the audience really rebelled because they could smell the inauthenticity.
I'm really picking up on the organic creativity that you had at that time, and really your production team and the writers being completely in sync with the audience. And on top of that, the prolific output, the productivity of pushing out and creating content very fast. I'm really, it makes me pine for that golden age of TV, right? Compared to what you have now, where huge corporations working on one project for the longest time, and there's absolutely nothing organic about it. It's you got the
corporate focus groups and all that kind of stuff. Focus testing. And
I want to hear what you think, like how you can't really go back to having something become authentic.
No, for us, in all honesty, it was a bit of a it was a hard parameters that we were working under, having to make 22, 24, episodes a year. It took us, I remember having this conversation with the network executive. The first year of the show, the first season of the show took us 14 months to make. So I remember going in to talk to the network executives about this and saying, look, guys, I think we're facing a mathematical impossibility. It took us 14 months to make 1 year of television. How are we gonna do this, right? And they were like, we don't care, this is, figure it out. This thing's a hit, so figure it out. And that constant grind of, now it would take a year and a half to make 8 episodes or 10 episodes, and you could, stretch this thing out. It was debilitating. And I'm the first one to admit that I sort of lost the thread after, you're just so deep in the weeds, you never have a chance to sort of float above it and see which way it wants to go. The machine just eats you up. And so I don't long to go back to those days. I actually think that 10 episodes or so a year or season, the audience has spoken in a way. That's what they seem to like. I think if something's on, there are certain kinds of network shows that still, the procedural shows, the ones that don't involve you having to watch every episode. You can drop into a show of a cop show or a medical show, but anything that has a serialized engine. Now, if we were to do 24 of those a year, I can't imagine how an audience would sustain. I don't think they have the attention span for that. And I think you get 15 episodes in and people would be like looking at their watch going, Jesus, is this thing still on? Like, what's going on here? So there's a natural rhythm, the same way that a song is, 2 or 3 minutes long, or a book isn't 12,000 pages. People have spoken. The audience has spoken. They want 10 episodes of a show,
But when you were pressured to put out that much content in such a short period of time, didn't that help your creativity? I remember hearing.
I think I absolutely do. Yeah, I absolutely
remember hearing an interview with Elton John when he said it used to be that you recorded an album, you set up the microphones, you went in, and the album was done in 2 weeks. And now you've got all these abilities with Pro Tools and editing, and it takes forever, and the spontaneity and the creativity is dead. I'm guessing
I'm a big proponent of the idea of guardrails and limits and all that kind of deadlines and things like that. I think the deadline really drives creativity, and it's the necessity thing. You just have to figure it out because you have to figure it out. And the first season of the show especially had that energy because we were over our heads. Every department on that show in that first season was so understaffed and so overworked. So departments that should have had 7 people in it had 4, and instead of something, that should have taken 12 hours, took 19 hours to do it, right? Everybody was so stretched, and it was such a labor of love. And that spirit of, it's sort of like putting on a play in summer stock or something. There's a kind of a spirit that goes along with that. And sadly, it was just unsustainable because the economics you can't have people work that hard on, but nowadays, like that first season of Heroes would have been 3 or 4 seasons of television.
And so do you wish that Heroes could have gone on longer, or are you happy with the 4 seasons?
No, I listen. We had trouble maintaining that pace of production at the time, and we were pushing. We had that same mission creep towards making the show, sort of more pizzazz and bigger, and things that, like I said, in those 4 seasons that we made, in the 5 years that we made the show, the special effects that we did in the first season, like I said, that would take 2 weeks and back and forth trying to get this right. We found by the 4th season we could do them in 1 day, and they cost half the amount, right? So that's how quickly that curve was changing. That there was a real Moore's law kind of thing with special effects. Absolutely, it's just crazy what you can do now.
Back in 2006, and all the opportunities you pounced on with the new technologies and the social media at the time. Now, I mean, everyone's talking about metaverse. The pace is faster, and there's a lot more hype. Where do you see the opportunities in terms of storytelling and TV series now?
I think that the whole idea of the Web3 part of it, the audience being able to interact and not only interact, but co-create with you things, or have ways of creating their own characters and in that world. I think nowadays anybody who isn't thinking about how to tell story across some sort of multiple platforms. I mean, this device that we all carry around, is, not only a content consumption device, but it's a content creation device, right? And so it knows where all your friends are and knows where you are. It's got all these capabilities, and with AR especially, I find very fascinating. I love the idea of narrative sort of popping out or pushing out into the real world and having a kind of almost pop-up quality to it, escape rooms, or that kind of thing, or a game that you can play around the narrative that involves your tracking devices, your activity steps, or or GPS or something like that. It just feels like creativity around storytelling can really explode around all of this new technology.
We're looking forward to welcoming you to Future Blockchain Summit and Fintech Surge. Tell us, what can the audience expect at the show?
Well, I'd like to talk about actually how to think about customers as audience, and explore the idea of audiences want to feel like they have some kind of agency in the world. They want to feel like they want to express themselves. One of the things I've found as a storyteller in Hollywood is that audiences want to express themselves around the things they care passionately about. So I've co-created or co-founded a startup called ChangeUp that allows people to donate micro donations, a software company that allows people to donate small amounts of money at point of sale. And this is a way for them to express themselves on the things that they care most about. And I think in a Web3 world where people want to create audience for themselves and push their ideas out into the world, one of the ways to do that is to express yourself as how you are changing the world, how you are making the world a better place through your consumerism and the way you move through the world and the tech that you use to do that. So I'd love to explore that.
We're looking forward to welcoming you. Okay, Tim Kring, screenwriter, and creator of Heroes. We look forward to welcoming you to Expand North Star. What can the audience expect?
I'm really looking forward to talking to everybody about exploring the idea of looking at the world through the lens of people being an audience and how to have a relationship with an audience. And I think whether you are doing a startup for customers or users that want to engage with your products, it's still very important to think of people as the psychologically, how do they create, how do they move through the world as an audience? And even when you're consuming, even when you are using social media, you are there as an audience. And I think it's important to understand the psychology of that. And I think there's a lot to unpack about how to understand, the world through the lens of creating for an audience. And so I'd like to explore that with them.
I look forward to being the audience for your session at Expand North Star.
Thanks. Appreciate it.